Sup, my fellas, don't forget to leave feedback and enjoy the story. Someone imagined a raider approaching a dragon. He remembered a hairy creature. Raiders hunt monsters for money. The protagonist imagined a smiling guy he knew. Raiders protect people, and the entire population considers them heroes because they risk their lives every day. So when you think about it, he looks like someone who could be the MC of a anime. The guy was watching TV intently. He believed that heroism does not live without envy. The brunette's eyes sparkled red. He thought raiders make people's hearts beat faster. The protagonist imagined a tired hero. Everything was enveloped in ominous energy. When a raider's heart beats faster, their bodies are illuminated by powerful mana. He imagined a guy armed with an arm. The protagonist believed their heart beats when death approaches. A bloody hero appeared in his head. The guy's body was enveloped in flames. Meanwhile, the girl entered the office. The brunette became very worried. When someone insulted a person, the hero in the hoodie frowned deeply. He asked if he was being offered to be a human shield. The man in glasses held out his hand. He asked his comrade to take it easier and reminded him that he needed money. The brunette looked away. He realized that the gentleman wanted to lure a raid on Dungeon W. He turned his head. He gave work to solo raiders as a member of the bureau. The protagonist remembered standing on the street when EW called him. He was glad that he finally got a profitable deal, but he changed his mind after hearing the order. The guy grabbed his head. He believed he was not some kind of meat to stand in the vanguard when clearing the dungeon of the debt. Tilting his head, he asked if he had another offer. He said that even guys of a rank lower than him found work. The gentleman in glasses felt awkward. He thought the protagonist knew this himself. The brunette leaned on his arm. Alwi reminded him that raiders of combat classes are rarely given tasks. Hearing this, the guy clarified whether he was being rejected because of his class. The gentleman adjusted his glasses. When the protagonist apologized for being so useless, the woman admitted to him that this was actually true. He said that recently, mages had occupied all the jobs. The guy with glasses bowed his head and reported that the others had varying success in finding work. He believed employers were avoiding warriors because they were more likely to get injured. The protagonist imagined the magicians casting magic on the injured guy. He knew they fought monsters from a distance while warriors fought in close combat, which is why they had more injuries. The guy believed that mages were superior to others in teamwork. The brunette grimaced and realized he understood this too. He knew that now there was no place for raiders of his class anywhere. The protagonist realized that back then, he needed to become a mage. 11 years ago, he was in his third year of middle school. The boy looked at the sheet in surprise. He got a good result in identifying his predisposition and was able to enter a professional institution for training raiders. He remembered the sheet of results. Back then, his magical abilities rose to as much as 97%. He imagined a girl in armor. The protagonist knew that she, now at the peak of her magical skills, had 92%. He thought his score was incredible. The guy remembered sweat pouring down his face. His predisposition to martial arts was only 34%. The brunette swung his sword because, despite everything, he chose the path of a warrior. The protagonist remembered himself upset. No good reason influenced his choice. He stood apart from everyone because, back then, his personal assessment of magicians was categorical. The brunette remembered the girl. He knew that back then, the ranks of mages consisted of buffers who couldn't even kill a cockroach without the support of warriors. The protagonist understands that now everything is the other way around, because combat classes have sunk into the pit and magic ones have been elevated. The brunette bowed his head. He wondered if his life would have been better if he had chosen the path of a mage. The brunette imagined himself starting to drown. He knew that a raider's development usually stops at the age of 20. At that moment, he decided that there was no point in regretting the past, because nothing would change anyway. W, looking at him intently, said that such an opportunity does not come up often. He admitted that he was going to offer this job to others, but thinking about his problems came to him. The protagonist believed that magicians once envied his talent. He clenched his hand into a fist. The guy thought that now was a worthless D-rank warrior. He raised his head and realized that the difference between his past and present was too great. The woman's eyes widened when the guy agreed to go on the raid. They looked away from each other. The brunette tilted his head and realized that he had no choice. He believed that he couldn't refuse even such a job to survive in this swamp. The gentleman's glasses dropped slightly. He told his interlocutor that he was doing the right thing. The guy stood up from his chair. When the gentleman said that they would see each other tomorrow at 7:30, he asked him not to be late. Hearing this, the protagonist reminded him that he had complained about being overwhelmed with work. The brunette raised his head and advised him to mind his own business and not think about it. Wu smiled slightly when he admitted that he needed to go there too. He said goodbye to him. The next day, the raiders gathered near the portal. The brunette leaned against the tree trunk. Seeing that it was already 8:252, He remembered his meeting with Bu. The protagonist closed his eyes. He thought that the gentleman should have told him right away that he wouldn't come. The brunette made a displeased face. He thought that it was much more profitable for women to work with more capable raiders. The guy turned his attention to another warrior. Looking at the serious man, he remembered that the woman is an A-rank mage. The protagonist exhaled heavily and thought about why the gentleman with glasses needed a raider bureau. He thought that the woman could join any guild. The brunette looked down. He thought that in the gentleman's place, he would have done much more. The protagonist remembered the man who emanated an ominous aura. Opening his mouth wide, he called him trash. The guy became S.E. Han, looked away when he was called by name. A fair-haired man approached him. So this got to be a solo leveling type do I'm seeing or am I wrong? He reminded him that they had already met. Ninho grabbed his neck. When the protagonist asked him if he had come to the raid too, he admitted that he had volunteered to go into a dangerous dungeon because he hadn't been able to find work lately. The brunette closed his eyes and agreed with him. The bearded warrior turned away and asked if he agreed that their brother had nowhere else to work. He said that people had stopped praising combat classes. He also thought that it was not worth spreading some fireballs from behind his comrades. The protagonist bowed his head, realizing that he didn't care about that right now because he was dying of hunger. Yahello winked and offered to do everything well. He asked if he wanted to drink a bottle of saju with him later. The brunette's eyes sparkled. When he suggested this, it was a good offer. The bearded warrior closed his eyes and started talking about money problems. He reminded them that he paid for their drinks last time. Yen felt awkward. His comrade winked at him, putting his hand on the back of his head. He said that he understood everything. The man grabbed his chin and agreed to pay for the drinks one last time. The brunette laughed and admitted that he felt uncomfortable being in his debt. At that moment, he realized that this gentleman was very simple. They looked back at someone who demanded that everyone gather at the entrance to the dungeon. The gentleman adjusted his glasses and said that they would be entering the dungeon in half an hour. The warrior exhaled heavily. Encho was sweating. He turned around and suggested that they start getting ready. The protagonist threw his head back and took out a walkie-talkie, bringing it to his mouth. Dian believed that a raider should remember two things during campaigns. You walked away from him. The brunette believed that blind luck plays a role in a raid. He imagined the GUI finding the treasure. The main character thought that luck can inspire any raider. He also thought that it becomes fatal carelessness because it most often paralyzes the brain. In his head, this chest began to emanate an ominous aura. He imagined how the warriors looked at each other. The dungeon immediately began to test the raiders for strength. When they stopped, soberly assessing the situation, he remembered the image of a monster with tentacles, and thinks that raiders are not lucky at all. The guy imagined how the creature attacked. He thought that tragedy is hidden behind luck. The brunette made a dissatisfied face, thinking about the second rule. His comrade asked why he was stuck. MHO looked back at him and asked if he was staring at his phone again. The bearded man smiled broadly. He admitted that he noticed his partner always doing this before going out, after which he asked if he was looking at a photo of his girlfriend. The protagonist raised his head and said that it was not so. He smiled slightly. There was a photo open on his phone. He mentally promised his mother that he would return soon. The brunette headed towards the portal. They entered the dungeon, which was filled with angry people, throwing his hand to the side. The guy demanded that the vanguard hold their shields tightly. He asked that everyone maintain the line. En grimaced in displeasure. The commander demanded that they hold the line even if they were dead. The monster almost touched the brunette. He realized he had more strength. The magicians began to cast spells and called upon the shining light of Alheim. The entire room sparkled with red light. They asked that the fierce flame of seers destroy the enemy. An explosion occurred in the dungeon. Someone began to approach the line. The monster burned alive. The guys watched the burning bodies. The brunette turned his head, seeing the gentleman in the cloak. He remembered that their guild was called Meteor. He knew that these newbie mages were quickly gaining popularity, and exhaled heavily. He thought that he would most likely not die with them. The guys sat down to rest. Ninho wiped his lip, closed his eyes, and asked if there was only the boss room left. The glass disappeared from his hand. He admitted that it was hard for him. He also said that he would have trained in his youth to raise his level if he had known that this would happen. The brunette turned away and reminded him that he was even a level higher than him. Muno smiled and asked his comrade if he had knocked out any items. He said that good things dropped in this A-rank dungeon. A system window appeared in front of the guy. He said that he would check now. The protagonist touched the screen with his finger. Something surprised him. The system suddenly glitched. He looked at her with confusion. Thien covered his face with his hand. The brunette bowed his head and thought about what happened. A system notification appeared. informing about system problems as well as the loss of connection with the user. The protagonist remembered that the system had never had glitches before. A notification appeared about the cancellation of the system launch. Looking at the blue screen, the guy thought about what the cancellation of the launch meant. Some melody played. Someone advised him to follow the light. Thien turned his head sharply, his face covered in sweat. A notification appeared, informing that an unknown object had invaded the system. A notification about the cancellation appeared. The brunette bowed his head. He thought about what kind of voice he heard. Looking down, he wondered what it meant to follow the light. Yunho looked at him with confusion. He asked what he was talking about. The brunette turned around and said that it didn't matter. The guy's eyes sparkled when his comrade reminded him that he advised following the light. The melody sounded again. The dungeon was covered with a stream of energy. Yan was very worried because he did not understand what was happening. Seeing a cloud of energy, he assumed that he was standing behind him. The bearded gentleman began to sweat. Noticing something strange in Yan, he asked if his temperature had risen. The brunette turned his head and said that he was fine. He wondered if anyone had seen this. The light stretched into the darkness. The brunette turned his head and decided to check something. The protagonist turned around. When his comrade asked where he was going, he promised him he would return soon. Thien frowned deeply. He wondered what was happening in this dungeon. The guy followed the light. He raised his hand. A notification appeared, informing that the characteristics window could not be loaded. The brunette, looking at the notification, realized that the system was still not working. He poked at the screen. A notification appeared about detecting damage to functions. Ain scratched the back of his head and thought about what was going on. The light stretched along the corridor. He remembered that in all those years since he became awakened, the system had never failed. He also realized that there were not even any damages and restorations. Bowing his head, the protagonist assumed that the voice was somehow connected to all this. He remembered the moment of the glitch when an unknown object penetrated the system. In his head, the dungeon was covered in bright light. He remembered a cloud of energy, thinking about the strange voice that advised him to follow the light. The brunette turned his head. He assumed that some changes were simply happening in the dungeon. The guy walked further down the passage. He imagined a man sitting on a throne. The protagonist knew that the name of the ER system supposedly comes from the word used to call the Asgardian gods, Odin and Thor. Yan understood that this system is the last hope for humanity. He remembered a ship sailing by 20 years ago. The waves were raging then because the year was rich and disastrous. The protagonist imagined the sky turning bloody when a tree of unimaginable size grew in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It stretched to the very sky. One day, this tree blossomed and covered everything around with leaves. In 9 days, the residents animatedly discussed what happened. Some said that this was a harbinger of the apocalypse, while others considered it a blessing from God. There was a myth of such a tree in the church. The protagonist knew that in reality people were wrong. Remembering the fresco, he realized that this world tree was in the first old legend. The plant lost its beauty when it finished growing on the 9th day. Various creatures emerged from the portals. When the land was engulfed in fires, this is how the invasion of monsters began. Wolves tore people apart. Many residents were destined to die at the hands of monsters, and the survivors suffered from hunger and plague. The beast opened its mouth wide. The protagonist believes that this is when people fell into despair. A man appeared in the fog. He stepped forward. The creatures bared their teeth. With the appearance of a guy covered in mana, people gained hope for survival. The beast ran sharply. They pounced on the man. The blonde dodged their attack. The first awakened defeated all the monsters. An ominous energy emanated from him. He was considered a man with godlike power. The guy imagined how a warrior defends himself from a creature. He knew that among the awakened, there are also raiders who hunt monsters. The brunette followed the light. He believed that the ER system was a powerful weapon controlled by people like him. En bowed his head. It was hard for him to think optimistically since the system had changed. The stone pillars began to sparkle. Someone approached them. The guy stopped near a huge door. He raised his head and couldn't believe what was happening. The brunette smiled ominously. Seeing the engraved beasts, he realized that there was a treasure hidden behind this gate. The protagonist imagined the gold coins. He knew that the treasury was a hidden room that appeared extremely rarely in high-ranking dungeons. He knew that special or even rare items could usually be found there. The brunette touched the door. He believed that the price of one rattle from such a treasury would exceed several hundred million. The brunette's eyes sparkled when he thought about finding an item above class. The protagonist assumed that then he would be able to say goodbye to the dark days of his life. He opened the door slightly and began to pray. The guy asked God to send him an item of class or higher. He opened the gate. Torches in the room sparkled. The whole room was illuminated with bright light. The protagonist looked around. He did not believe that such a space was hidden behind the gate. At that moment, he realized that what was broadcast on TV was not an empty fiction. Something was brightly illuminating the entire treasury. The brunette smiled widely and assumed that there was an item in front of him. He walked towards it and thought about how good it was. Yan stretched out his hand. His fingers were enveloped in a stream of energy. A notification about receiving a new piece of equipment appeared. The protagonist reached for the item and was happy about what happened. He believed that the system was restored at the most opportune moment, and thought that good news does not come one day. He squeezed the item with his hand. He is about to turn into the new Sasuke Uchiha with this eye. A system window appeared, telling about Odin's lost eye. The boy saw that this item was mythical. He covered his face with his hand. A drop of sweat ran down his cheek. A notification appeared that the absolute calculation skill was comprehending the structure of magic calculations and destroying it. A blue screen appeared, and couldn't believe that this was all real. The brunette smiled slightly. He remembered that out of all the items he sold at the auction, the best one was S-Class. He also remembered that this artifact quickly went for tens of billions. As soon as he registered it, the price of magic items could be set by their owner. The protagonist hit his chest. He realized that he had found a mythical class item. The boy knew that there is only one artifact of this class in the world. He smiled widely when he realized that he did not need to try his best anymore. Yan assumed that he would not have to risk his life in the dungeons because the guilds would stop ignoring him. He decided to say goodbye to the terrible life of a raider. The brunette bowed his head and decided to try out the magic item he received. An ominous energy emanated from the lost eye of Odin. The protagonist thought about when he would again hold such a magical artifact in his hands. That is why he decided to use the mythical item before selling it. Notification appeared informing that the item was assigned to the user. Dean demanded that the system cancel the use. The brunette squatted down. He realized that he almost lost such a good item. The guy stood up and realized that he no longer wanted to wear it. He assumed that he would earn hundreds of billions by selling the eye on the black market. The protagonist realized that he no longer wanted to get dirty in the dungeons. The magic item moved to the inventory. The brunette realized that he could no longer level up after turning 20. Yan put his hands on his hips. He believed that the eye would be of new use to him. The protagonist believed that the system crashed for shadows, an anomaly, or an unexpected change. He walked away from the stone pillar. Yan had long been accustomed to unexpected situations. The sky was covered with clouds. Now that the dungeons had become a reality, raiders considered incidents to be commonplace. The guy looked around. He understood that unexpected situations usually came down to luck or tragedy. At that moment, he decided that it was time for him to set the sail. You felt awkward when he said that his comrade would appear soon. He assumed that he had gone off on his own business. The fair-haired raider began to shake his head. He asked the commander to wait a little longer. The man folded his arms in displeasure when Muno called out to N. The brunette looked at his comrade with confusion. He demanded that he move because they were already moving on. The protagonist bowed before the commander and apologized for being late. The magician reminded him that they should not act rashly in such a situation. He also asked that such a thing not happen again. Hearing this, Yan promised to be more careful. The guys watched the commander leave. Sweat ran down Yunho's cheek. An ominous aura began to emanate from the brunette. The comrade hit his shield with his fist and advised him not to be sad. The protagonist smiled at him and admitted that he was fine. The guy turned away and said that he would pay for this IU tonight. He said that you can't sit on someone's neck all the time. The brunette went to the rest of the raiders. Nuno scratched his head and assumed that he had already gone crazy at the age of 27. Yan made a displeased face. He bowed his head and was glad that he had managed to change the topic of conversation. The guy examined his comrades. They were inside a dungeon, which is why everything that happened remained within these walls. Yunho looked at the brunette with concern. Yan understood that in a dungeon, you can't brag about finding an expensive item because it was tantamount to suicide. Something began to crack. The protagonist realized that it would be wise to sell the eye after the raid was over. Niho watched him closely. The brunette decided that he shouldn't attract the attention of others. The crack extended further. The commander raised his head and reminded that their formation was reformed. A loud crack was heard when the man suggested continuing the raid. The ceiling began to collapse. The protagonist's face was covered in sweat. He managed to jump back. The guy slid on his back on the ground. The brunette opened his eye. He didn't understand what was happening. The dungeon was covered in fog. En turned his attention to his comrades. The girl tried to cover her mouth. The brunette grabbed his face, realizing that the dungeon was covered in poisonous smoke. He stood up when he realized that he would die if he continued to breathe. He also decided to quickly get out of the dungeon. Someone came up to him and started calling his name. MHO, covering his mouth with his hand, suggested that his comrade run. He said that this smoke could be dangerous. The brunette squeezed his face tightly. He looked back and turned to his friends. The protagonist suggested that everyone leave the dungeon. Drops of blood splashed on him. His eyes widened as he saw a blade pierce his comrade's body. Yunho started spitting blood. A sword was pierced into his back. En grabbed his neck. He even opened his mouth. The guy realized that he needed to run. The brunette started running with all his might. He remembered the moment when the explosion happened. En leaned on the wall with his hand. The moment when the dungeon was covered with toxic smoke appeared in his head. He moved towards the exit. The guy remembered how his comrade died. The protagonist stopped abruptly. He raised his head and assumed that it was not monsters that were involved in what happened, but dungeon thugs. The brunette bared his teeth and assumed that he would run into toxic fumes. As he approached the exit, he also decided that it was better to stay inside because killers could be waiting for him at the entrance. A drop of sweat ran down his cheek. He thought about why everything was going so badly. The guy bowed his head and realized that now was not the time to show his weakness. Baring his teeth, he decided not to give up just like that because he had found a mythical item. A drop of sweat was dripping down his chin. Someone was approaching him. Everything was covered in flames. The protagonist was attacked. An explosion occurred before his eyes. He looked back. Someone assumed that En would be able to survive. A strong aura emanated from the unknown person. The brunette frowned deeply when he realized that it was a woman in front of him. The guy with glasses smiled ominously. He raised his head and reminded him that he had warned him about this. Lightning emanated from the gentleman in the hood. He reminded him that he promised to come today. The woman stepped forward. He bowed his head. Thien touched his shoulder, turning to his comrade. He turned his head and clarified whether what happened was his doing. The gentleman with glasses grabbed his chin. The protagonist reminded him of the toxic smoke and the attack on the meteor. Woman smiled ominously, stretching out his hand. He told his partner that he was right. The brunette's pupils narrowed. Grabbing his shoulder, he decided to calmly sort out the situation. He asked his comrade why he did this. The gentleman with glasses spread his arms. He admitted that he did this at the request of his sponsor. Squinting, he told him that many people hate the Meteor Guild. The guy bared his teeth. The woman believes that you can quickly earn a bad reputation by disrespecting other guilds. An ominous aura began to emanate from the killer. The protagonist knew that thugs used narrow passages of caves. The floor of the dungeon was filled with bloody bodies. Yan believes that the killers carry out dirty contracts. He remembered his bloody friend. At that moment, he realized that the attack on the Meteor Guild took place in a blind spot. His shoulder suddenly hurt, emitted powerful energy. The guy assumed that he wouldn't be able to handle him. The gentleman with glasses smiled slightly. The protagonist understood that in the entire population of the country, only 2% of the magicians are A rank, which includes the woman. The brunette bowed his head, remembering that he has a D rank. He did not consider himself weak, but not strong either. The guy grabbed his shoulder. He decided to just keep quiet because he was not the target of the thugs. His face was covered in sweat. He realized that he could not escape because the ER system was broken. And remembered how the flames engulfed his comrades. He realized that he could only escape from the killers. At that moment, he realized that he wanted to avenge everyone he fought. He remembered the image of a smiling Yunho, whose death he dreams of avenging. The guy turned his head and realized that he could not do this now. He called out to double. The gentleman with glasses made a displeased face. The protagonist decided to pretend that he didn't see a grassel appear. Dean bared his teeth when he remembered that there was no more room for the weak in this cruel world. Abu's body was covered in mana. When he addressed his Hyan, Yan's shoulder began to bleed again. Lian parried the enemy's attack. He covered himself with his hand. A bruise appeared on his face. He realized that he would have died on the spot if he had reacted a second later. The guy saw Wen smile ominously. The mage held out 2 fingers. He said that his target was not only the Meteor Guild. Golden chains rushed at the enemy. The protagonist dodged the attack. Half of his face was covered in blood. Seeing the mage snap his fingers, the guy realized that he needed to escape from the dungeon. He closed his eyes and thought about why a woman needed a simple D-rank raider like him. Magic balls appeared behind the master. The protagonist wondered what he had done wrong. The chain was enveloped in strong mana, and did not understand who wanted him dead. He touched his neck. Opening his eyes, he wondered who this person was. He imagined feathers flying. Thien bared his teeth. An image of a person with powerful energy appeared in his mind. He looked down and called him trash. The protagonist sank, realizing that his life was worthless. He raised his head. Elu was very surprised when the guy asked about his father. They looked at each other. The gentleman adjusted his glasses. Lightning emanated from his body. He laughed ominously. Yan felt awkward when the man continued to laugh. Smiling widely, the gentleman asked his hireling to listen to him. He looked at his hand and called him a good guy. The brunette bowed his head. The woman admitted that he liked him. The protagonist remembered a photo with his mother. Raising his head, he said that he wanted to ask a question. Jin remembered how he mourned his mother 5 years ago. Looking intently at the interlocutor, he clarified whether his father ordered him to do what happened in the winter 5 years ago. Men smiled slightly. He thought the guy would not guess about it. His eyes sparkled. Blood began to flow from the brunette's abrasion. The gentleman stepped forward and admitted that he did not understand anything. He smiled ominously. He told the guy that his father did this to his wife and then to his son. The man attacked the brunette. The mage extended his hand. He asked if he also thought that this was too much. The dungeon was covered in red fog. Yan said goodbye, gaze away from him. He stared into space. The protagonist tried to say something. Something sparkled. Odin's lost eye was enveloped in mana. Wu put his hand to his ear. He asked the raider if he wanted to say something. His hood flew off his head. His pupils narrowed. Powerful energy began to emanate from the guy. God, his mouth was open. He wondered where such mana came from. The ground under his feet began to crack. Debris flew to the sides. The Oyu started sweating as he noticed that the mana was getting stronger. He thought about how to interpret what was happening. A drop of sweat ran down his cheek. He felt a bad premonition and decided to end it quickly. The gentleman extended his hand and suggested that they stop joking. He demanded that Yan die. Golden chains wrapped around the guy's body. The weapon was aimed straight at him. It approached the brunette. His eyes sparkled brightly. The golden chains shattered into pieces. Wu's mouth dropped open. The guy looked away. A notification appeared about assigning an item to the user. The brunette became sad when he realized that he could no longer sell the eye. A notification appeared about the presence of an empty card. Wu's mouth opened wide. He thought that this could not have happened. Frowning deeply, he noticed that his magic began to dissipate. The brunette stepped forward, bowing his head. He addressed Dubu. The protagonist activated the effect of Odin's lost eye. He'd raised his head and confessed to the enemy that he would finish him off in the most brutal way. A notification appeared about the creation of an active skill. Everything around sparkled. A super fast chain began to appear behind the brunette. Bu raised his head and asked where he got such an ability from. He stared at the protagonist. When he remembered that he spent years to master this spell, the gentleman wondered how a D-rank raider warrior had it. He frowned deeply and confessed that he did not understand how the man managed to learn the ultimate spell. After which, he warned Han that he did not stand a single chance against him. The brunette looked back at the super fast chain. He attacked the enemy and said that he would not know until he tried. The gentleman's face was covered in sweat. The chain picked up tremendous speed. Wu covered his face with his hands. The protagonist looked at him menacingly. The gentleman dodged the next attack. A magic ball floated above his hand. It attacked the enemy. Yehan activated the absolute calculation skill. A new chain appeared from the portal. It headed straight for W. The guy swung his hand. A magic ring appeared in front of him. Mana was emanating from the brunette's eye. The gentleman was very surprised. The super fast chain approached him. It sparkled. When he realized that he couldn't dodge it, Ehen watched the explosion. The debris floated into the sky. The guy continued walking. He approached W. The gentleman began to spit blood. Tears flowed from his eyes. He begged the protagonist to spare him. The brunette attacked the guy again. Drops of blood covered his glasses. Yan raised his head. He opened his eyes when he assumed it was over. The guys felt the grounds began to close. He had no stamina or mana left. He looked up and realized that he hadn't expected such an ending. He also realized that it had happened right after the successful find. The protagonist realized why he had been so lucky today. Finding himself in a dark space, he remembered that a raider couldn't help but show up for a date with his death. The guy began to lose consciousness. He realized that death was cold. His eyes closed. A notification appeared informing him that a new control system, SWISE-T, was being installed. The brunette opened his eyes slightly. When the system offered him to download it, he learned that when loading a new system, he would move to the point in the past. Smiling slightly, he realized that he would be able to move to the past. He assumed that he could be saved. The protagonist remembered the line from the notification. He realized that he still had one day break waiting for him. Dean wondered if it would be luck or tragedy. Throwing his head back, he allowed the system to start downloading. He realized that he could only do this. The brunette smiled slightly. He came to terms with what had happened. The Nor system started to launch. Goddesses appeared in front of him. Among them was a red-haired girl. The blonde smiled slightly. The heroine with gold earrings looked back. The fair-haired girl extended her hand. She took someone's hand. A notification appeared, informing that the protagonist had become an enemy of the great ER. The gods were now watching him. The brunette suddenly woke up. He got out of bed. The guy looked around. He noticed a wooden table. On it stood a photo of him with his mother. The protagonist began to examine his hands. The light illuminated them. A magic ball appeared between them. The system informed him that he had successfully returned to the past. The guy's eyes widened. He assumed that he was in a dream. Yan remembered his dead mother and how he lost his comrades. He did not believe that he had returned to the past. The guy imagined the image of a man. The protagonist decided that he was in a dream. He looked at what was happening, confused. A photo with his mother appeared in his head. The woman smiled slightly. Yan did not expect the dream to be so long. The blonde heroine looked at him. The brunette almost burst into tears. He hugged his mother tightly. Tears were streaming down his face. The protagonist did not want to interrupt such a moment. A notification appeared that it was November 15, 2020, and the time travel was complete. Yan jumped out of bed, holding his heart, and tried to breathe. Then there was a notification that some restrictions were imposed on the user's actions and his body was restored by 20%. The hero tried to catch his breath, sweating. He looked in front of him with his eyebrows drawn together and asked if he was still sleeping. The guy looked to the side, thought that this was the apartment he lived in before. Another notification came out that a new quest had been received called Rest, and was secondary because the protagonist was seriously wounded in the battle and needed to restore his stamina to 80%. The difficulty level was F, but the reward would be one empty card. The yellow-eyed man asked what quest he was talking about. He stared at the notification. After that, the dark-haired man exhaled and thought that he needed to find out something. The warrior began to remember the place of time travel and thought that he had not died in the battle with W. Then he remembered himself bleeding and thought about the reason for what had happened. The guy immediately remembered that a notification had come out that when loading a new system, the user travels in time to the point he chose. Then he thought that it was still because of the new system that it had returned him to the past. The hero extended his finger to the notification and thought that he couldn't be surprised by something like this because strange things had happened to him before. If what had happened could give him new knowledge, he looked at the particles leaving and said that he could skillfully adapt to similar situations, and that was the main thing. After that, the yellow-eyed man raised his hand to his chin and thought that the system had sent him 11 years back in time. Now he should be in the middle class in his 3rd year of study. He glanced to the side. A notification appeared that the control system had been changed to Norner. The guy wondered if this was the name of the new system. The one who had returned began to slowly get out of bed and thought that, frankly speaking, what was happening still seemed like a dream to him. He began to walk slowly and thought that there was one thing. The dark-haired man took the calendar in his hand. A smile appeared on his face. Yan said that he was sure of one thing for sure. There was an inscription on the calendar. It said that it was the day to apply to Mills Academy and that it was imperative to choose a martial arts class. The attorney took hold of the pen. He crossed out the words about the combat class and thought that he had a chance. The boy smiled softly and thought that to hell with the combat class, it would be better to become a mage. The hero brought chopsticks with rice to his mouth. He put it in his mouth. Tears rolled down his eyes. The woman looked at her son with concern. She raised her eyebrows and thought that something was bothering him. Then the blonde remembered how he hugged her at the entrance. The dark-haired man pressed her to himself. The girl with a ponytail thought that her boy had always been so steadfast, and now he was crying bitterly. The mother still put down the chopsticks and turned to Anne. She looked at him and asked if something had happened to him. He smiled softly and said that it was not so, and that he had just had a nightmare. The guy put down the chopsticks. When she asked if he really had a nightmare, he said that it was true. The hero immediately remembered his mother's corpse. His eyes were filled with sadness. When the woman looked away slightly embarrassed, he said that he needed to tell her something. She said that she felt it. She looked softly in front of her and thought that he might be afraid to enter the academy. When her son looked down, the blonde thought the raider profession was very dangerous and there was serious competition among them. The mother closed her eyes and thought that if he did not want to, then let him continue his education in a regular school. Maybe that academy was considered prestigious, but if her son refused to enter it, then so be it. The yellow-eyed man looked in front of him and calmly said that he was thinking of transferring to the magic faculty. The mother, closing her eyes, approved of his desire. Then it dawned on her and she opened her eyes wide, asking again. She thought about who always said that she would choose the warrior class. The woman was slightly confused. She thought that her son was a thoughtful guy and did not think that he would change his mind without a reason. Then the blonde raised his head. He touched the dark-haired man's cheek. The woman in the beige sweater smiled softly and asked if he was sure of his decision, to which the son answered affirmatively. The mother tilted her head to the side and told him to do as he saw fit, because she would like him to think first of all not about money, but about what he would do in life. The hero was again on the verge of crying. She continued saying that the main thing is to find your calling. She will always, in everything, support him. The protagonist immediately began to wipe away tears and thought that now was not the time to cry. Afterwards, he imagined his father and thought about taking revenge on the E-rank raider. His eyes immediately became aggressive. He thought about becoming stronger. A notification appeared that the rest quest had been successfully completed and the reward for this was an empty card. The hero did push-ups on one hand while standing on it. Afterwards, the protagonist stood up and said that the quest was finally completed and the card was received, which meant that the beginning had been made. The attorney wiped his head with a towel, looking at 2 notifications, and said that it was not yet clear what kind of system this was made of, but it was already possible to benefit from it because he knew the future and he knew both the hidden parts and the ruins that could be captured. The guy pulled on his sweater and thought that he had a good memory. Once he had even been a guide in a dungeon. He put his hand on the back of the chair and thought the problem was in his abilities because with the exception of absolute calculation and super speed chain, he only had combat class skills in his arsenal. The dark-haired man leaned back in his chair and then wondered what was surprising about that, because he was going to become a warrior. Then he looked away and wondered if there was anything he could do about it. The yellow-eyed man sat and simply looked at the notification. It stated his stats and status. He thought that his level had dropped, as had his stats. The next windows were about his passive skills, and the active skills were the ones he had recently acquired. The guy looked sadly in front of him and wondered why only the passives remained the same. The next notification answered his question, writing that due to the effect of the attracting the attention of the god's skill, the user's passive skills remain the same as they were before the time jump. The hero immediately asked again. A notification came out that explained the skill and said that it was a blessing from God. It accelerates the user's development and explains the effect that after returning to the past, all passive skills were saved, and at each level, all characteristics become more by 1. Anne was immediately surprised and asked again, after which he cursed in surprise. Then he looked away and thought that the gods were watching him. He then asked about other skills. The passive skill of the absolute god's eye allows you to see through illusions and recognize the truth. After that, a notification came out that explained the skill of the high-speed chain, like a lightning chain that attacks the enemy and can paralyze the enemy. The more chains released, the more mana is consumed. The hero sat among all these notifications and said that he did not really understand why the eye of the absolute god was needed, but the super fast chain is a serious toy. He then wondered about his characteristics. He looked at the window with his stats again. The protagonist, propping his head up with his hand, said that physical strength is not so important for a mage, agility would not be superfluous, and mana is not worth mentioning. Then he looked up in front of him and said that there was one button. Notifications cascaded that his agility, mana, and endurance had been increased. Ian said that victory loves preparation and endurance. Then he imagined a running man and thought that unlike mana and strength, it does not increase combat power, but increases the fatigue threshold in the case when the same action is performed repeatedly. If you invest in endurance now, the effect will be felt at each new level. A notification window began to disintegrate above his hand. Afterwards, he picked up the card and said that they had sorted it out, but now the question was what to study. He thought that for now, the super fast chain would be enough to attack, and even if he copped with a high-level enemy spell, he would not be able to use it due to lack of mana. The guy turned the card in his hand. That's how this video ends. If you have sat through to the end, please don't forget to press the subscribe button and leave feedback. Greeman out.